Hi. Hey, what a beautiful sight you all are. It's so nice to see everyone. Let's give ourselves a big round of hello to each other. And I know I heard from a bunch of people that they really wanted to be here and they couldn't. They're going to be watching online. So if we could give them a big also round of applause welcome to everyone who's watching online. Let them know what they're missing. We are going to have a pillar of our community, Joe Bruchac, come up and read poetry for us. Yay! And then we're going to have our open mic readers come up. So I'm going to let you know. I'm going to use a lot of big numbers. So to talk about Joe Bruchac, you have to say the last 5 decades. His poems have appeared in 1,000 publications, translated into over 20 languages. He has more than 180 books in numerous genres, which range from poetry, fiction, picture books, nonfictions, and plays. He has a novel in verse, Rez Dogs, that was listed by NPR as a best book of 2022. His newest collection of poetry is Voices of the People, and that's verse biographies of notable indigenous people over the last 1,000 years. And it's also accompanied by Native American art, and he has a lot of his books out in the lobby tonight for sale. In 2023, he was named the first Poet Laureate of Saratoga Springs, New York. Yay! And for that, he was awarded a major fellowship by the Academy of American Poets. And now I saw there was someone lurking in the sidelines here, but it's actually Joe Bruchac. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Kwai, Nidoba, hello, my friends. I've been told that I shouldn't have my hat down too low or they won't see my face, so anyway, I think that's okay. They can tell me in the back room. It's good to be here with you tonight and to be part of the circle that poetry always makes. And I think that the great thing about poetry is that it lasts beyond our breath, and it connects us with those yet to come, and connects us with those who were, and in many ways, still are here in our hearts and in our minds. So I'm going to share with you a few poems from a couple of my earlier books, and then some new things I've written since being named Poet Laureate of Saratoga Springs. I've been assured by the mayor's office I may be the first, but I'm not going to be the last. So keep that in mind and support wherever you can. I have to start with this poem because a very dear friend of mine made a trip all the way from over in Massachusetts to get here. It's dedicated to him. It's called A Song of Falling Snow for Peter Kinney. A sound comes out of the forest as it fills with falling snow. It is my father's voice, and it is a song, although I never heard him sing, even in dreams in the years since he has been gone. I'm going now to walk in that forest to gather the many words falling white upon my shoulders. This is a little book of mine called Indakina, Our Land. And I think we need to be reminded that our land, we human beings, is always shared, and it is all lands. This is a poem I wrote when I was in Europe about 1989, just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Somehow I managed to get to East Germany, and then coming back through that wall, I wrote this poem, Crossing into West Germany. There are borders on earth and lines on the maps, colors and barriers, human names stuck onto the soil, as if earth could claim to understand or speak our tongues. as if the hawks looking down in long flight saw nations and flags, not forests and valleys, places to live, to care for their young. But the wind still blows over every border, and the soil that sifts through the hands of farmers responds the same to drought and rain. Ask me now to which nation I belong, and I will answer without words in a song, that language all our ancestors spoke, learned from the flow of clear streams to the sea, birds chanting praise to each dawn. We'll be hearing a lot about borders in the days and weeks to come. I think it's important to remember we create them and we support them by not doing as much as by doing. I've been fortunate enough to travel in parts of West Africa, and this is dedicated to the Dogon people who are going through a lot of hardship because northern Mali is a zone of conflict with soldiers actually from Russia working to protect a government that does not represent all the people. This was when I was visiting there in 1992 to the village called Tirili, Dogon village. From the top of the scarp, the land fell away, baobabs and low brush vanishing into the old Sahara's grasp of sand and stone, while on the dry breath of the wind came the jingle of a harness bell of a Tuareg rider on his sleek camel, cresting a distant horizon, the dry smell of spice on the sun. The village was nowhere to be seen, only the reds, the browns, the grays of earth, the circles and blocks of rock, until we looked again and saw, as our eyes took in that subtle motion of goats and people at the foot of the cliff, that the town was there, right there, 1,000 feet below, blended so perfectly into all that was around and was within, that it was as open and hidden to view as every single grain of sand. That's from a book of mine called Ndakina, which means our land in the Abenaki language. And when we say it is our land, we do not mean it is a land that excludes, keeps out others. It is our land, and we belong to it. My wife and I have been engaged in very serious Taoist studies for quite some time now. And this is a poem which is based on the Tao Te Ching, not an exact translation, but based on aspects of that ancient teaching, which has still so much to share with us today. Tao says, to lead the people, you must follow behind them. When leaders wear the finest clothing, the fields fill with weeds. The one who is brave and calm will always preserve life. Those who conquer do so only when they yield. Good people do not argue. They know the tree that does not bend will finally be broken. This is a little book that my son Jesse and I did together, Nisnol Siboal. It means two rivers in the Abenaki language that we teach and try to speak. And this particular poem is one that I think is very appropriate for where we are right now. I'll do it first in Abenaki, then I'll translate. Nobama sa winoak. Saki posi did kizos, pamosad, udawu dik, pakangan asok, kisisi gonawal, no so kamel, kizos, wasakano, wawanik, li nakarad. Wika wila, onda, kinogen shibina, koko mesna, nani ponsat, kina, kionak. Miko wadamon kiona wajiwi ao odi. Bagaliwi, Bagajiwi, Wasanek. Pathfinders. Sun walks a path across the sky. Our eyes follow sun's bright journey from dawn to dusk. Evening comes, we are not alone. Grandmother Moon looks down on us, reminding us there is always a path back to light. This is that book that Carol mentioned, Voices of the People, and I'm so honored to be in a book that has illustrations by so many incredible contemporary Native artists. This is the illustration that accompanies a poem for Crazy Horse, for example. And I want to read the last poem in the book because it's about someone who was a friend of mine, someone I admired deeply. Her name was Wilma Mankiller. She was the first woman chief of the Aniunwia, the Cherokee Nation. More enlightened, perhaps, than some nations. Wilma Mankiller, 1945-2010. Wilma Mankiller, whose Aniunwia name was Ashilunki, the flower, was no delicate blossom, but always a fighter. She honored her man-killer name, that in the language of her people was Askayati, honoring one, donating one, meaning one who was a leader in battle or one with the power to avenge wrongs. Not only did she fight to become a chief, engage in those things for her nation, she fought back from a car accident that almost took her life and would have crippled one whose body was not filled with a spirit of determination. The role she played as a unifier, a true peacemaker, one unafraid to always speak up when others were silent, was so much like that past warrior known as Nancy Ward, the beloved woman of the past, that it would be no exaggeration to say that Wilma became her people's beloved woman. Maybe you can tell I put these poems together today. These are new poems, ones, as I said, that I've written since my investment. Best way to be invested, not with money. This is dedicated to a very dear friend of mine named Lance Henson. Lance is a Cheyenne dog soldier, a poet, and one of my dearest friends. We have been many, many places together, even in prison without benefit or incarceration. So this poem is dedicated to Lance, and it tells a story of something that happened to us when we were doing a program called the Oklahoma Institute of Summer Arts for teenage kids in Oklahoma, placed in the Wichita Mountains. The promise. We had promised them they'd see something special that morning as we climbed King Mountain in the Wichita Range before the dawn, bringing a group of Native teenagers up to the summit to greet the new day with a fire in the old way, cedar and sage smoke rising. Lance and I had something special in mind, a surprise for those young folks who might have their eyes opened to promise of life always all around. We'd scouted the route to the top the day before, and when we reached the highest point, there just below us was a natural bathtub in the ancient granite, the size and shape just big enough to hold rainwater 3 feet deep. And in that warm water, on that bare peak, no other sign of moisture around, were swarms of tadpoles hatched from eggs some determined mother trekked up to lay. The climb that morning was just as planned. We arrived before the sun rose up, lit the carefully piled dry sticks we'd set up the afternoon before. Then, after that small ritual, led the kids over to that tank and saw to our shock that it was dry. My first thought was that those small lives had also dried up with that water, shriveled into death, abandoned alone, like so many of those 2 centuries gone, forced from their lands to a territory where life would be hard, promises few, and tears many. Then one of the Cherokee girls called out, "Look, look, look here, they're everywhere." And indeed they were. Countless small toads who'd grown legs overnight, now leaping downhill to a land they'd not yet seen, but trusted would give them the promise of green. And this is a poem for my hometown of Saratoga Springs, which I love very much and have been here. I haven't been here all my life, not yet, but 82 years so far. It's called Remembering Elms. In my younger years, Saratoga Springs still was a place of stately elms, those tall old trees lifting fountains, arching branches, casting shade along Broadway and the other graceful streets of the city. In photographs 2 centuries gone, they rose up by great buildings that fell to fire or the wrecking ball, Grand Union and Convention Hall, no more now than memory. I was one of those who took down great elms, not here, but during my college years in Ithaca, working summers for the tree surgeon father of my best friend, Phil. I'll never forget the clinging scent of sap from a dying giant elm, its bark peeled back, showing hieroglyphic borings of those beetles that carried the Dutch disease demise of all those trees. And in those lost years of the 60s and 70s, at times our town streets reminded me in their off-season bareness of those vanished trees. Back then, when one common thing said after raising season was done, down Broadway you could fire a cannon. Dying from the top, springs capped or disused, like those trees, the city seemed to be slumping toward an end, and yet it was not. Today, new buildings gleam along Broadway next to renewed Victorian facades, shining bright silver. Springs flow again, reminding us of the blessing of rebirth that's always lived here. And though those great elms are gone, their memory rises with new trees, reaching deep into the soil that old roots made strong. And this is dedicated to everybody I've worked with in the writing workshops I've done over the past 2 years, and all those in this room who I know are poetry, not poets. They are poetry, right, Jay? They are becoming poetry. This is called When We Hear a Poem. When we hear a poem, what do we hear? A poet's voice, the sounds of words, embrace released by the rhythm of breath from a single throat? Or is it something more we may hear than just that dance of syllables and silence? Do we hear ourselves in those spoken words? And more than hear, does it help us to see, to feel, to question what it is to mean, what it is to be? And yes, I admit, it was foolish of me to ask that question, not just step aside and leave that space for the poem to answer as I whisper, listen, listen, but not to me. Last night, those of you who were not here missed an incredible performance by David Fadden, who is a wonderful Mohawk illustrator and the grandson of a man named Donna Dolan's, Ray Fadden, who founded the Six Nations Iroquois Museum in the Adirondacks. And David now runs that museum, the third generation. And this is in honor of David and a very dear friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, Chief Jake Swamp. Tkaroneninkan is still his Mohawk name. Skinnakowakan, do you carry the great peace? That was the greeting spoken on this land before the time of foreign wars and less than peaceful ways brought from beyond our shores. Skinnakowakan, can you carry the great peace? Hey, Skinnakowa, yes, I carry the great peace, was the reply. There was a time on this Turtle Island when nation fought nation, every injury repaid in kind, eye for eye, life for life, when no one could walk alone without fear. Then taking pity a messenger, the peacemaker walked about, speaking of how peace is good for all, helping them find that sacred place within each heart where compassion dwells, reminding them to listen, practice patience, and act with kindness. Thus it came to be that whenever that question was spoken, do you carry the peace? The answer always became, Skinnakowa, Yes, I carry the great peace. And so I say, not just to you, but to myself each day, those words, and hope the answer is, hey. As I said, these are our new poems, and this one in particular is appropriate to read here. Tells its own story, so I'll just tell you the title, Lena's Cafe. How many nights did I drive her home, clutching her cash box to her chest, then wait in my car for the light to come on, home and safe at last in her small apartment upon North Broadway? That humble home she had to leave when the choice came to pay her rent or keep the lights of the cafe on. As she moved into the never-finished drafty back room she shared with her cat. Today, from a new entrance grander than anyone could have imagined in 1960 when the doors first swung open, an elevator can take you now up to that room where Lena sat so many nights with her friend Old Tom, playing Scrabble at her table against a back wall, cigarette in hand as she watched the stage glowing so bright it shone not just in this place, but in the hearts of generations. A new stage now, and new caretakers, no longer worrying about paying rent, drafty windows, leaks in the roof, and ancient uneven stairs so hard for aging knees, the same stairs up which Lena trudged, then fell in her final sacrifice. So join me now, celebrate her spirit which never left this place. Join me to remember and give thanks to all of those who've shared their gifts of story, song, and poetry, those who are more than echoes here, and those who we have yet to hear here at Lena's Cafe. Time for one more poem. Another part of my checkered past is that I was very involved in the civil rights movement and had the honor of marching with Martin Luther King and many other people in those 1960s days. And this is called The Road, in memory of so many. How long is this road, the road to Montgomery, to Selma, to Jackson, Chicago, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, this seemingly endless track they walked never alone, ancestors with them. Some ancestors torn from the rich red soil of a land across wide water, salty as tears, a land they still carried in their hearts and stories. Some came from soil as African red, of those states where a person was seen as less than human, though that same fire burned in their memories. Some walk today in defiance of power, knowing their lives matter and freedom is real. Anger, confusion, uncertainty, the seeds first sown by those who held power and in their narrow minds saw not people but color. So the past is not past. And this road still goes on. There are miles yet to travel, but the circle is strong for those who don't give up. My brothers, my sisters, my own people remember that we too have been walking, often right there beside you. And I hold out my hand, still believing that kindness and sharing may bring us, despite all the losses and all we have felt and still will feel, in this land we have died for, this place of belonging that all our ancestors never forgot, have promised to us if we never give up. Thank you for listening to me.